Hey everyone, in this video I want to talk about the top 10 hardest bosses found on Japanese first-person dungeon crawlers. But rather than throwing post-content bosses and call it a day, the idea is to show a progressive order. Some beginning bosses, then others that you find at the mid of the game, and so on. If you consider there is another boss that should be here, let me know. Without further ado, let's begin. I wanna open the curtain to this journey with a phrase that I've said several times while playing the RPGs. And it is that there's no such thing as being over-prepared, and Odyssey Netsus slapped those words in my face really good. This is the second boss that you fight in this game. In my humble opinion, I thought I had a decent team, some items and freshly rested to give it my all. And yeah, it was a usual Odyssey boss encounter. After something like 15-20 turns, I was done with Berserker King, but I wasn't prepared for a second boss fight right away. So when I saw Sir Nunos stepping into the field, I knew I was forked up, because I had used some items and boosts on the previous encounter, and well, effectively there was no such thing as being over-prepared, and also I forgot about its dump mechanic every now and then. And well, after a couple of turns I accepted my fate and died without honor. There are harder beginning bosses, but I wanted to start with this one because oftentimes in early stages there's no such a thing as multiple boss fights, so I was overly confident, and that led me to a game over. In the 9th entry, I wanna throw an annoying boss, Yatsuzuki Spider. This enemy is found in Labyrinth of Zangetsu, and the main issue here is that this game is a modern approach of the original wizardry. And with modern I mean just the looks, because every other detail that wizardry had comes here. So it has a gimmicky character creation and so on. Well, the thing with this game is that your characters can die, and at the beginning of the game it is a really bad idea to revive them, because gathering the money and then betting if they revive is just a bad joke. So here for example you can see that by the time I had reached this boss, I had lost 3 companions of the original team. The thing with this game is that there is a mechanic named Corruption, which reduces the total HP of your characters, so your party members can be corrupted by ink moves. This pushes your team to be as aggressive as possible, to end these encounters quite fast. Inevitably, mages and some healers have it rough as they have few HP. So after this fight I lost another 3 companions, because curing Minette was throwing almost the same price as reviving, so this game can take a decent amount of time if you constantly messed up. And while I was able to beat this boss in my first try, I had to farm some levels and equipment before jumping into it. However, I lost 3 characters in the process, so not sure I can count that as a real win here. In the 8th spot, we can find the Führer in Operation Babel. This is what I call a cheap early boss, because there's not too much you can do by the moment you reach this enemy, essentially because defensive units don't learn anti-critical hits until level 18-16 if I remember well. The thing is that a critical hit is one hit KO, simple as that. In other words, your tank is praying to not fall victim of one of these attacks. Unfortunately, I didn't record when that happened, but if I remember well, I tried this fight 4 times. There are basically 2 approaches for this encounter. 1. Have a team strong enough to chew the boss HP while praying for RNGesus, or farm enough levels for your paladins, so they can learn the skill to avoid these tragic events. However, that is not all, because even while avoiding crits, this boss hits like a truck. So even while praying for RNGesus, the Führer was able to take down my tank and turns later my physician. By that moment it was up to the multiple debuffs I have cast on the enemy accuracy and my 2 main offensive units. Fortunately things aligned well enough and it didn't turn into another game over. In the 7th place we can find the Death Sword from Class of Heroes 2. Ironically it is not a sword, but what can I say? What is fun is that this thing is not even a main boss of the game. This one comes from a side quest, reason why it is as simple as it looks, at least in comparison with other bosses you'll find along the journey. So what is the deal here? If the previous boss was able to hit like a truck, this thing hits like one of those. If I don't place it any higher, it is because this boss is just a glass cannon, so the only real option is to hit with the same force, which unfortunately didn't go that well, and my party members were falling like flies. It was a bit surprising because it was a cookie-cutter team. One ninja for the wacky lucky hits, 2 support units, and a ranger for the lulz while exploring. However, by the second turn, 3 characters had already passed out, and in the following turns my support and warrior saw the light at the end of the tunnel. Nonetheless, I was throwing a dumb bet here, because in the last turn of my idol, I was able to cast Axelius, which increases the evasion, and the way Noir was created for a classy ninja, a speed tank for the win, so she was the MVP of this mess. Several turns later, the sword followed the rest of my team. In all honesty, I'm not entirely sure how I would tackle this challenge if I had the chance to do it once again. At least the last resort did the trick here. In the 6th place, we find Lucy, from Undernauts. Lucy, in a summarized way, is the nemesis from Resident Evil 3. We are going to find her along the journey multiple times, and while the first encounters are quite easy, there is an encounter at the 3rd floor of the main game that has high chances to beat the heck out of you in annoying ways. At least in my case, it was a battle that I had to retry 3 times, because I didn't want to farm. Now, this is what I call equipment/level check. It is not that the game suddenly increases the difficulty in an exponential way. It is a fight that you can pass by literally increasing like 5 levels, which is something kinda fast in this entry, and updating your gear, which I consider the latter as the most important one, because we come from multiple areas where most likely we didn't change that much our gear, and this entry encourages the player to make farming points in different areas, ideally those with higher levels to link multiple battles, hence the risk and reward. Now in this footage you can see how I tried with different levels. In one of them you can see that my paladin has 788 HP, second attempt 850 HP, and the lucky one 904. Then why do I place it here in the 6th place? If it sounds like a standard fight for a JRPG, because in a well-crafted setting, the game offers the player multiple areas to explore, rather than brute forcing your way along the journey. So it is effectively a game check that oftentimes can be trivialized as a difficulty spike. While there are those in many other entries, we are still taking inertia. In any case, if you try to fight Lucy in a weak state, most likely it is an impossible task, because she hits like a truck by the moment you can fight her, and also because some minions arrived on the area, and they heal her HP in decent amounts. In other words, the game is telling you something like deal as much damage as possible. Simple as that. In the 5th entry, let's follow with a real game check, which is something that can turn many players out of the window. Aether Mirage, from Demon Gaze. She's a fight that we find in the last stretch of the game. Little after this encounter we find the last boss of the main story. So in the previous entry we saw a gentle check because in matter of an hour we can fix our issues with Lucy. But here, if you messed up your characters, the farming session can turn into something like 1 plus many hours to come. And it is because this fight is a damage check. Aether Mirage is not particularly hard to tank or stay alive on the battlefield. She's a fight that can turn into an impossible task because her healing can reach big numbers. Unfortunately, I don't have the whole fight recorded, but imagine that many turns had passed and I was getting a bit tired of trying multiple ideas. All of that effort was to bring a dumb setup for Carnage, which is a suicide move where the samurai lands hits until it is unable to avoid the enemy attack. That is the reason why it looks as chaotic as that. Now, there are multiple ways to finish this fight, which is having a well-trained warrior, samurai, Mars as main demon. Keep in mind that she's more like a glass cannon, which can turn into sour situations, or have this demon which name I am not going to say. In other words, there are multiple ways to fix it, but oftentimes those are ideas that we overlook with ease. From here, let's follow with gimmicky bosses. In the 4th place, we find Jail Nightmare, from Mary Skelter Nightmares. In comparison with the Skelter 2 or Finale, Nightmares has the hardest bosses in the series, so if you're having issues here, the very last stretch of the game is nerve-wracking. But let's go back with Jail. This is an encounter that has multiple stages. Unfortunately, I don't have them all on footage, but let me explain the main idea. This is a boss fight that you need to tackle with something like a minigame where it can hurt you in the overworld, which at first, believe me, it is something that you're not expecting at all, or at least I didn't. However, there is another boss that has a similar dynamic in early encounters, so the thing is that you need to beat Jail in 3 stages, if I remember well, and then jump into this last fight, which is most likely going to be the heck out of you if your party members don't have defined tasks within the team. So let me break it down. Sleeping Beauty is just a hard-hitting character without fancy moves. Red Riding Hood is a jack of all trades with buffing, debuffing, healing magics, and some magic attacks to choose some damage from time to time. Alice is the shield from the team, as this thing hits like a truck, so it is imperative to have a tank constantly using cover. Snow White works as a secondary jack, or main character with the skills to double effects from items, turning her in a second healer of the team. And Thumbelina is another character which uses magic attacks and some buffing moves to increase defense, and last but not least, Jack, either curing or reducing the stress level from our Blood Maidens, because things can take a horrible turn if anyone enters into Blood Skelter. Now, if this encounter looks as it was sped up, it is because the bosses in this game can skip your turns if you take some time to think what is going to be your next move, so you need to act fast and keep the balance within the team. That is the reason why it is important to have multiple healers, buffers, and way to deal damage. So with all of this, you can see how I am healing my characters quite constantly and chewing damage left and right with different characters. If one part of this whole process breaks, you need to react really fast, otherwise in matter of turns the whole team falls apart. It is fair to say that I had to retry 4 times this fight, but throwing different iterations to cover deficiencies here and there. In the third spot, Georgios, from Stranger of Sword City. I know some may question things like, why don't you place Lucifiel, Quasar Alpha, Mumik, or Evil Spirit Knights? Okay, Evil Spirit Knights is a really gimmicky boss that you cannot fight until you are pretty much in the last stretch of the game. So you are playing dices if you wanna fight it once you reach the underground old town. Mumik is a boss that you have no business with until you wanna reach the true endings in the post-content. Lucifiel falls under the same idea, and Quasar Alpha, I don't want to throw those ideas into this video, otherwise I just have to set post-content bosses and call it a day. So on the same line, before final bosses, Georgios offers an encounter where if you have deficiencies in your team composition, it is going to take its time. Because it can abduct characters, and as it is a boss fight that includes 2 enemies on the field, being able to hit the front and back plays an important role. I don't have the whole footage, but when I start recording, my mage, healer and ranger died. What's left is my warrior, samurai and tank. The one who got the MVP here was my tanking unit, because she was the only character left on the battlefield, so she was playing the card to defend and stun the bosses, while the samurai was chewing damage here and there. Now I take the L here because by this moment I was still managing some reclassing and closing gaps for the post-content, and while this game rewards all of those decisions in the very last stretch of the game, while fighting some other enemies it can turn into a nightmare, because you need to increase several levels, so this is a game where you need to have a lot of patience, unless your objective is just the main story and that's it. In any case, after this point, you have once again the chance to farm some things and close gaps, and everything starts to flow once again, or at least that was my experience. In the second place, due to not having the footage, I was going to throw the UP from Galeria, but Velkurana in Refrain has a similar idea, way easier but similar idea. Now, the deal with Velkurana is that you can reach this last boss fight without finding the key items to effectively tackle the challenge, turning this encounter into an impossible task. Simple as that, because after X number of turns, she starts to deal pretty much one-hit KOs, which effectively feels like a big difficulty spike, but that is just if you're trying to brute force your way. Now, I place Velkurana here because from here till the end of the game, if you didn't create a solid plan for each pact or brigade of puppets, fixing those issues takes an abysmal amount of time, plus some equipment checks, but if you take the time to fix that, most likely you are going to find the items to complete the loop. Fortunately, or unfortunately here, out of pure luck, I defeated her with those 3 different approaches. But we are talking about 20 days where I just simply farmed to check the limits of the task, while reading, watching other things, etc. And that is why I consider this last boss as one of the most annoying ones. But she's just the beginning of the end, because if you take the right route, the challenges ahead are not that friendly. And then, that very last stretch throws the same idea. In reference to what I wanted to say about the UP, you need to tackle the boss in a specific order, otherwise it is a battle that can extend its time a freaking lot. So Velkurana is annoying, but it can be much more annoying. And in the first place, one of the absolute hardest bosses in DRPGs, Memalev, from SMT Strange Journey. This is the last boss in the original DS, and that is what I wanna refer here, because if you didn't drop the game by Eridanus, and you brace yourself to see this through, Memalev is that one last boss I have heard plenty of acquaintances say. Let's not talk about that. If you play the 3DS version, it is way easier, because of several skills that you can acquire along the journey. One of them, and perhaps the most important for this fight, is Death March, which gives the MC the chance to die and you won't see a game over. So you can work around what is the most frustrating moment in this fight. After you beat its first phase, that thing has the chance to use this. In the DS version, that is the most annoying way to end an already frustrating encounter. Back in the day, I tried this fight around 10 times if I remember well, because Aaron Jesus wasn't on my side. So in this list, I crown Memalev as one of the hardest boss fights you can find in this subgenre. I hope you found this video informative, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.